scene, but it's taking those words and putting those words into the art that creates the comic. So how do you go about actually preparing the writing?
Well, for me, it's funny because a lot of people think that the writers deal with the words and the artist deals with the art. But that's really kind of a false dichotomy because
it looks perfect on the projector.
What is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll make it work.
anyway, it's kind of a false dichotomy because the writer is also giving instruction for what the image needs to look like. I'm a big fan of Akira Kurosawa's idea that dialogue should be like soundtrack. It needs to be there to set a mood and set a tone, but you're telling a story visually, which means we need to show, not tell. So the most that I can cut out dialogue and speech bubbles that are unnecessary, the better. I tend to have severe reactions to stuff that's choking out the art with large word bubbles. Because the larger you make the balloon, the less you have room for the art. And so trying to kind of, Twitter in many ways is not all that different from what comic writers do because I've kind of got 140 characters to work with and I don't want to go past that.
Questions?
Yeah. Have you ever gone back to, say, change your script based on what the artist portrays?
Yeah, and actually I've gotten into a habit where I hate finishing my script until I know what artist I'm working with, or until I've seen some of their pages, because sometimes, and Tom Krasinski is a good example of this, his drawings put so much personality into those characters that all of a sudden their voice changed for a little bit. It's kind of like, and I'm going to use a geeked out reference here, but in the show Lost, they weren't planning on keeping the Benjamin Linus character on the show, but he was such a great character that he's still around. And so
he's a central character.
Yeah. And I think that sometimes happens where an artist will draw something and the character will have a certain appeal, and so all of a sudden
it changes.
How I write them. And so, for instance, characters that Tom draws are a little bit more neurotic or a little bit more tender, or they've just got a different feel to them because of the artist I'm working with. And so yeah, that does change.
All right, can I?
You ready?
All right, yeah.
Excellent.
Well, first, I'll go ahead and pull up my site, and it'll allow me to kind of do a little rundown of some of the projects I've done, and each one is different, and I've taken pretty much a different approach to each, technically and kind of from a broader aesthetic standpoint. I'm really.
Do you want me to click through that for you?
No, it's cool.
Okay.
I'm really sorry that I got my back to you guys. I'll try to do a little bit more from this angle. So after that, after I do a little show and tell, I'll do a slight 5-10 minute demo of my actual process. I went to art school in Savannah. I graduated in 2003. And while I was still in school, I started going to some of the comic conventions in the Southeast. And at one of them, when I was still in school, I met a writer, and he and I got together and we did a pitch for Image Comics. So it was essentially an encapsulated package that showcased my art skills, his writing skills, and gave a synopsized overview of the project itself. And it was picked up, and it was my first time in print, and it was like a lifetime ago, really. I mean, how I worked back then was pretty traditional, a lot of just traditional processes using Xerox, pens, pencils, and since then I've kind of developed a process that is a lot more streamlined and pretty computer-centric. And now I am completely paper and inkless. I don't scan pages. I don't do anything involving actual physical paper. I mean, I will occasionally, because the mood strikes, and you just kind of have to get the inks out and get a little messy. But yeah, I was certainly.
You have a question? Or?
Yeah, I was just wondering, going from completely paper-based or to totally digital, how does that change your art style at all? Because I've noticed from going from a Wacom to charcoal or pen or something, I draw differently when using a tablet.
There definitely was kind of a transitional period where things were a little more structured and stiff. Just from a surface standpoint, you'll lose things like dry brush, the ability to kind of do a more messy line.
Mm-hmm. Is it stuff that you get once you have practice with the tablet, it comes back.
It'll loosen up. It'll
Okay.
loosen up to the point where it'll start to really look a bit more organic.
Okay.
And like this, well, for instance, this piece is a hand inked piece, and then this book floating around Supermarket, which is right over there. That is a hand inked book, but everything since then has been inked digitally. So I'm sure you'll be able to spot differences, like because they're there. They're absolutely there. But I had to kind of make the trade-off.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had to give up certain things in order to get this more streamlined ability to just produce.
I can imagine the time savings.
It saves a ton of time. Yes, I don't have to scan. I don't have to piece things together. I don't have to do any scaling. I don't have to do any cleanup in Photoshop. It's right from one program and then back into Photoshop and then to the printer. So it really does save a ton of time. A good example of the hand-drawn approach is this book, Supermarket, which I began working on this in 2005, and it was a 4-issue miniseries that I wrapped up in the summer of 2006. And I'm sorry, there's a little disconnect here between what I'm looking at and the screen up there. All right. There we go. Okay. A good example of what I was interested in at the time is a look that's like this, which is more organic, more brushy. Like you can see the little bits of grit and things. You can see where I'm going over the panel borders. You can see little bits of dry brush. For this book, I formulated a color approach that would be very artificial and very neon, and each individual scene would get its own very specific and very bright color palette. I didn't want anything to look normal or local color, which is blue sky, green grass, brown wood, whatever. Like I wanted everything to be soaked in color. Which if you've ever been to a city like Hong Kong or Tokyo or even any city, like at night you get such a strange rich mixture of colors that you can only get with artificial lights hitting things. So like here's a good example. You've got the green fluorescent light coming from inside the bus. You've got a purpley sky from like that polluted city kind of atmosphere. You've got orange sodium lights burning up there, casting orange on everything, and then up here you see the inside of the bus where everything's just kind of lifeless and green and gray and just kind of devoid of any real pleasantry whatsoever. But
is this Dallas?
Sorry. You don't even know who's following me on Twitter. Sorry. No, this is like a fictionalized kind of LA sprawl kind of thing, like a kind of like a fictionalized East Coast corridor of pretty much like all the major cities in California kind of joining into one super city. So this book, Supermarket, I had complete creative control over the visuals, and I got to do silly, completely non sequitur visuals like the rising sun pattern here behind a gang of Yakuza Japanese mafia guys, so like completely ridiculous but totally fun because I was allowed to do it. That wasn't in the script. No one said do that. A lot of the things, little visual cues I did in this book to give it a certain certain unique identity, a lot of that stuff was not in the script, and no one told me not to. No one told me to do it, but I just felt it was my duty.
Like visual details or like entirely new scenes?
No, not new scenes, just characterizations. Like for instance, the smoke coming from the Yakuza guys. Never is there a cigarette in their mouths in the script. Never do they come with a unified mass of smoke behind them in the script. But I was like, you know what, that's gonna look cool. I'm gonna do that. And the smoke coming out of their lungs is Japanese wind bar visual pattern, and that's because it's smoke coming out of Japanese lungs. And there's smoke in the book that's like